What is up, guys? Rick Kakas here, and today we are going to be showcasing all of the massive changes made within Anthem in yesterday's huge patch. There is a bunch of stuff that is impacting the game. If you play again today and you haven't played in a couple of days, your experience is going to be pretty dramatically different. Not only has loot been changed, not only have bugs been squashed, but also the balancing in the game has changed pretty dramatically. So we're going to talk about some of the stuff that wasn't so good before and now is actually pretty powerful, and potentially how you can create new builds to push further and further into the higher Grandmaster difficulties. And so, let's get started. Now, in terms of overall high-level fixes, one of the main changes, and I'm not going to be going over necessarily everything, just the big stuff that's really going to impact you on a gameplay basis. So, loot changes. Common and uncommon, so white and green loot, are completely out of the loot table on Grandmaster difficulties once you are level 30 or above. So once you hit level 30, you are not going to see white and green drops ever again. And that's actually pretty sweet, because before, if you can remember, if you open a chest after doing a Grandmaster 1 world event, you'd maybe get a white, a green, and then 2 purples. Well, now, after this update, you might get all 4 purples, or 2 blues and 2 purples, or a masterwork and 3 purples. Because the lower end of the loot pool has been eliminated, it's only the higher end now, and therefore, all of that stuff has a higher chance of spawning. Additionally, remember that more purples, even though they're not masterworks, and masterworks are obviously more sought after, you can use those epic embers to create purple consumables. People often sleep on consumables, but they provide huge bonuses and are an important part of the endgame. Moving on from there, another change in the general fixes and improvements category is that the ability to quick play for strongholds has been added back into the game. So if you're farming strongholds, quick play is definitely a viable option, especially because you'll join someone in progress, you're going to be able to help them out, and often they're not at the very beginning of the stronghold, obviously, they're halfway or more into it, and therefore that means that because there's guaranteed masterwork drops for killing the boss, you can more efficiently farm strongholds. You start from halfway in, potentially you just start at the boss fight. So again, farming masterworks via quick play strongholds is not a bad idea. Alright, now moving on from there, there's been some pretty substantial balancing changes to the creatures you're going to find in the game, most notably Titans. Now, farming Titans is an important part of the endgame, especially when the Here Be Giants event is ongoing. Like, there's so many Titans and you really want to kill them, and it was a frustrating experience at times, especially when you're stun locked, etc. Well, here are the changes. So firstly, they've reduced the overall damage mitigation from 100% previously to between 70 and 75% depending on the damage type. So before, when you'd shoot a Titan not in the weak spot, you do literally 0 damage. Now you're still going to be able to do a bit of damage, and that is definitely going to make things a little bit easier. Also, increase the time that weak points are exposed. Fix an issue that prevented effects from applying and thus preventing combos, so you can now combo Titans. Increase the damage the Titan takes from weak point hits. Lesser Titan's weak points have been changed to always be active, so if you see a lesser Titan, always go for it. It's going to be so much easier to take down. You're going to be doing more damage to the weak points, and they're always going to be up. Improve the collision on the ring and seeking projectile attacks. These should make them easier to dodge. That was a huge complaint. Like, you'd see those floating rings, you dodge and still get hit by it. It was incredibly frustrating, so hopefully that's been mitigated quite a bit. They decreased the radius of the seeking projectile attack, again going to make it less annoying, and decrease the damage done by the self-destruct ability. So that was kind of annoying. People would line up for the loot and then get almost killed or killed because it would just blow up. So those are the changes there. Again, Titans are a lot more farmable. If you see them, don't ignore them. Previously, if you had some trouble with them, this is the time to take them on. Also, Frozen Scar enforcements and Scrappers can no longer move or attack while frozen. Often, they'd be covered in ice and still attacking you. So, frost abilities are more powerful now versus those enemies. The Monitor's health has been greatly reduced in the Heart of Rage stronghold. No one would do that stronghold because that guy was like so impossible to kill. Now, potentially farming Heart of Rage has become a lot more viable. So that's something I'm definitely going to check out to see how fast you can get through it. In terms of force, players will be less likely to be repeatedly staggered by heavy attacks, reducing the annoyance of combat. And also they adjusted the force applied by some creature attacks down, which will lower the frequency of players being staggered. So staggering is incredibly annoying in the game, but it is part of challenging those more powerful enemies, but it's going to be hopefully less annoying after the fact. Now, moving on from there, these are the big balancing changes. These are really going to affect, like if you had a build, if you have a character that's in Grandmaster 1 but really struggling to go into Grandmaster 2 and he's affected by the things I'm going to go over, oh my goodness, that character is going to be noticeably more powerful, and these changes are going to open up a lot of builds. So what happened is that they adjusted the damage scaling of secondary damage sources. These now scale with average item power. This will increase the scaling of the following. Firstly, melee damage. So to explain what that all means is essentially your melee would scale with your level, but then once you were kind of level 30 and once you ascended in those Grandmaster difficulties, if you're going from Grandmaster 1 to Grandmaster 2, your melee doesn't increase. But if you go from level 29 to level 30, your melee does, right? It scales with your level, it doesn't scale with the difficulties, and also it doesn't scale with your item quality per se, unless you specifically put on an item that increases melee damage, but sometimes there's not a lot of that. So by making melee scale with item quality, if you go from mostly purple epic gear at level 30 to mostly Masterworks with a few legendaries on your javelin, you're going to increase your melee damage along that same vector. So overall, melee is now a lot more potent in those endgame difficulties. So this really applies, of course, to Interceptor. Melee is a big part of Interceptor when grinding from 1 to 30, and then it falls off dramatically. Now melee is a lot more powerful. Melee builds for the Interceptor are a lot more viable in Grandmaster difficulties. Something else I want to really mention is Ranger. Ranger has a lot of Masterwork components that buff up its melee damage, but it just didn't do enough damage to warrant them. This is going to open up a lot of melee Ranger builds. The next thing that was updated was combo damage. The combo damage was already pretty good. You already really wanted to be comboing, but now, because it has been affected by this scaling, comboing is even more effective. That's a huge boon to Storm players, and now you really want to look at your two abilities and try to make sure that you can prime and detonate yourself, or be playing with someone who's priming and you're detonating all of that stuff. Another big change in this scaling was ultimate damage. So previously, you know, a lot of the times when you were fighting in Grandmaster difficulties, your gun did more damage than your ultimate ability because your ultimate really didn't scale. So now, ultimates, they're not only way more useful to cast, but ultimate builds are now on the table. This is really going to affect the Ranger. One of the Ranger Javelin's strengths is that it has a lot of components that allow it to cast its ultimate very often, much more often than the other Javelins. But a Ranger ultimate build, like even then, it was not that bad, especially in Grandmaster 1, the Ranger ultimate could output some decent damage, but now it's going to be so much more viable, and it's going to be a lot more viable in GM2 and GM3. Ranger ultimate builds are back on the table. Moving on from there, status effects. So this is actually pretty important. Stuff like lighting someone on fire. The actual damage, okay, let's use an example here. The flamethrower for the Colossus Javelin. Using the actual flamethrower and the damage inflicted by the flamethrower will scale normally. If you get a better flamethrower, it's going to be even better in higher Grandmasters. But using the flamethrower and catching the enemy on fire, the actual fire damage that would tick down over time when you're not shooting that enemy, that wouldn't scale. So on those higher Grandmaster difficulties, stuff that created status effects and spread status effects to other enemies wasn't that good. Now they're going to be a lot more powerful, and stuff that was already pretty decent, again, like the Colossus with the flamethrower, now because the status effect is going to be doing even more damage, those became a lot more powerful. So keep an eye out for stuff like that. Fire, electric, acid, all of that stuff. Moving on from there, item procs. Example, the proc from Yevgeny's Thunder. So Yevinia's Thunder is a scout rifle where, well, not a scout rifle, a marksman's rifle, sorry, that has a 33% chance to, when you're hitting an enemy, it causes a lightning strike to hit that enemy. Actually great at shredding enemies with shields. But when you're, again, scaling through those difficulties, the actual damage from that lightning strike wouldn't necessarily increase. It wouldn't scale. So now, anything that has an effect like that, in terms of a weapon, is going to be a lot more powerful. So weapons that inflict status effects, weapons that cause explosions, like fire explosions, whatever, all of that stuff is now going to be much more powerful. And lastly, they say that item power scaling has been changed to better reflect the actual power of the item based on its rarity. This is applied to all items retroactively. Players will see the power of their items go up. So if you log in and you're more powerful, your number beside your javelin is higher than you last expected, that is why. Now, those are definitely the biggest balancing changes coming with this patch. Again, they're going to affect and create entire builds around them, but there's also been some balancing in terms of specific items. So firstly, they increased the base health of the wind wall and bulwark point to provide better scaling in higher difficulties. The duration of these has been reduced to 20 seconds, down from 60 seconds. So if you're using wind wall as a storm or bulwark point as a ranger in order to soak up incoming damage, you're going to soak up a lot more damage now with this update. So potentially throwing down a bulwark point and reviving a teammate is now a lot more useful. Now, 20 seconds down from 60 seconds, that is a nerf, but it doesn't matter at all. It lasted 60 seconds, but it died in one sniper shot, right? So it didn't matter that it lasted that long. So an increase in power is hugely beneficial. Moving on from there, Burst Mortar's damage has been increased to 300, up from 145, and its cooldown has been reduced to 6 seconds, down from 10 seconds. Its description has also been fixed. Huge buff to Burst Mortar. I actually have a legendary Burst Mortar for my Colossus I really want to try out because of this. Also, Flak Cannon for the Colossus, its damage has been increased up to 42 from 30. Now, of course, these are really small numbers. You're probably thinking, 42 damage in the endgame? What are you talking about? But it's a small number at a base level, and then it's all scaled up with all of the percentages and crazy damage increases later on. So, an increase to 42 from 30 damage, that is a big boost. Next up, Battlecry's description for the Colossus has been updated to explain it also reduces the resistances of affected targets. So previously, what Battlecry says is that you pull aggro onto your Colossus, but now people will know that any enemy affected by this also has its resistances reduced, so it makes them weaker, more susceptible to damage, and so on. So that's great. Now, also, Wraith Strike's damage for the Interceptor has been increased up to 250 from previously 200, and it will now apply an elemental effect to targets based on the active aura of your Interceptor. So if you are using ice skills, and if you detonate an ice combo, for example, just by meleeing, and you get that ice aura, you can use Wraith Strike and it will inflict ice elemental effect to an enemy. So you can potentially now trigger combos with that, which is pretty darn sweet. Now moving on from there, we have Masterwork item balance updates. So increase the base damage of the following Masterwork weapons. So if you find any of these, if you have any of these, they received a straight buff. Try them out. So the Ralnir's Blaze, the Rolling Carnage, the Cycle of Pain, the Last Stand, Glorious Result, Insult and Injury, Sentinel Vengeance, Gnosta's Bomb, Vasa's Surprise, Soothing Touch, Renewed Courage, and Atinian's Gambit, whoever you said it. So again, all those items, they've received a straight buff. Try them out for sure. And that is it for all of the big changes that are really going to impact you when you now play Anthem. Frankly, I think all of these changes are very beneficial. Really glad to see them changing the balancing, and especially really glad to address the item scaling problem. It made it so that just a few builds were viable. That should open up pretty wide now. But if you want to see the full patch notes, that's of course linked in the description down below. Guys, that's it for the video. Hope you enjoyed and found this informative. If you did, please remember to help me out by simply rating and especially sharing this video. If you guys want to see more Anthem content similar to this, don't be afraid to slap that subscribe button. If you guys want to get in touch with me and keep up to date with the latest channel activity, the best way is to follow me on Twitter at RickCacus. That's linked in the description down below. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, have a good day.